Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the presentation of colors presented by the United States Coast Guard Ceremonial Color Guard, and remain standing for our national anthem and the invocation. Color Guard, advance the colors. Retire the colors. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Ben Sanford, United States Navy, will offer our invocation.
Let us pray. Lord God, throughout the ages, there have been people who have maintained a relentless curiosity, which has sparked exploration, innovation, trade, and connection. Rather than an inward focus marked by fear, their expanding outward vision has been marked by hopeful possibilities. Today, we gather to honor the character of maritime peoples throughout the ages. Thank you for the efforts of the Navy League to promote the connection between defense industry leaders and major military decision makers. We specifically ask for your blessing upon the Coast Guard, whose men and women guard our coast and protect those who work and play on the water, as well as missions all over the world. Give them the strength of spirit necessary to accomplish their daily mission with honor. Now we ask for your blessing upon the food we are about to partake and our time around these tables. May the connections we nurture through curious conversation multiply hopeful possibilities around our world. Amen.
Please welcome to the stage the CEO of the Navy League of the United States and the 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, Mike Stevens.
I was enjoying my conversation. I forgot I had to speak. So, well, good morning, everyone. We love our Coast Guard, and we love hosting this event for the Coast Guard. And just wanted to thank the Commandant and the MCPOG for allowing us to do this again this year. Thank you very much for that. I don't know about you, but yesterday's words from Secretary Del Toro were pretty powerful as he mentioned the Navy, the Coast Guard, and the Marine Corps several times in there. We're grateful for him and all of our speakers for preparing their insightful remarks throughout this event here, the 3 days at Sea Air Space. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sea Air Space 2024 Coast Guard Breakfast. It's such an honor this morning to host the Coast Guard and all of our distinguished guests in attendance, including our stacked group of panelists that will be moderated by Admiral Linda Fagan, the Commandant of our United States Coast Guard. Just a little history. In 2019, after a congressional speaker had to unexpectedly bow out, as they always do, the Coast Guard answered the emergency call and took the stage. The event was such a hit that we decided to continue the series, and this year marks the 5th year that we've held this Coast Guard breakfast. And again, we want to thank the Coast Guard for that. Can we get an applause for the Coast Guard breakfast? Now, please allow me just a minute to thank our sponsor whose generous support has made this particular event possible, and that sponsor is Airbus U.S. Space and Defense. Is Airbus happen to be in here this morning? No? Sorry, I probably shouldn't even have done that. Where are they at? I can't see. There they are, Airbus. Thank you, Airbus. Man, I'm so glad you're here because that was going to look really bad for us. Good to see you this morning. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the 52nd National President of the Navy League of the United States, Mr. Chris Townsend, to the stage for some remarks. Townie, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning. Welcome to Day 3 of Sea Air Space 2024. I hope everyone here is having a wonderful show. But again, as Mike said, we do love our Coast Guard, and good morning to our fellow Coast Guard supporters. On behalf of our 31,000 Navy League members around the world, we welcome you and thank you for joining us for this year's Coast Guard breakfast. Members of the Navy League are staunch advocates of the often underappreciated heroes of the Coast Guard. We should make no mistake about it. They are invaluable and a critical member of the U.S. Sea Services, essential for our nation's prosperity and security. We must do all we can to support their requirements so they can fulfill their duties unabated. That includes creating opportunities like those found here at the Navy League Sea Air Space Expo. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce this morning's moderator, Admiral Linda Fagan, Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard. As the 27th Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Admiral Linda Fagan oversees all global Coast Guard operations and over 78,000 active duty reserve, civilian personnel, and auxiliary volunteers. She has served on all 7 continents, from the snows of Ross Island, Antarctica, to the heart of Africa, and many ports in between. Admiral Fagan has worked with both the International Maritime Organization and International Labor Organization on flag state and port state issues. Admiral Fagan is the longest-serving active-duty Marine safety officer and holds the distinction of being the Coast Guard's first-ever Gold Ancient Trident. Ladies and gentlemen, the 27th Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Admiral Linda Fagan.
All right, good morning, everyone. I don't know how I feel about that ancient title. Actually, I do. Seasoned. I'm seasoned. Hey, so good morning and welcome to the 5th Coast Guard Breakfast. And I also want to thank the Navy League and our sponsors for allowing us some time this morning to talk about our Coast Guard. And, you know, I am 2 years into my position at this point, and as I reflect on all that we've done over the past 2 years and all that we have still to work towards over the next 2 years. But I want to share with you, and I hope you walk away from this morning with optimism, a sense of optimism for where the Coast Guard is and what opportunities we have in the future. You know, on the Sea Service panel on Monday, we talked a lot about assets. There was a lot of discussion around ships, acquisitions, investments, the industrial base, and what is needed to maintain and operate frontline capacity in ships. And, you know, our challenges are, well, we're not as large as the Navy. The challenges are similar with regard to getting our major acquisitions on time, delivered, maintaining them, and then people. There was a lot of talk about people on Monday, and we will carry some of those themes forward here this morning. You know, we face some similar challenges to others, the surface depot maintenance shortfall. I talked about this in the State of the Coast Guard. We've got about half of the maintenance budget that we need to maintain the legacy assets and others. We're competing for access to the defense industrial base, the same as the Navy and others, both for new shipbuilding and ship maintenance and ship repair. And our shore infrastructure backlog and investments that we need to make to field those new assets also continue to challenge us as a service. You know, we've talked quite openly, I've talked quite openly about some of our shortfall in workforce, and we'll talk as a panel about investments that we've made and where we're going as a service to reduce some of those shortfalls, but more importantly, improve and ensure that once somebody finds their way to the service, that we make it easy for them to stay, and we've been doing a lot of work there. And then some of the other conversation we'll have this morning will be around what are the opportunities that these shortfalls in maintenance budget, people, et cetera, what are the opportunities that it prevents for the service as we think differently about how we operate? And I'm going to tell you one vignette just as a scene setter for the kinds of work and innovation that we do. And the Harriet Lane, which is a medium endurance cutter that had been home ported on the East Coast of the United States, and in December we changed her home port to Honolulu, and so that crew and ship is now based in Honolulu. And yesterday she came back from her first patrol through the Pacific, through the South Pacific, where she engaged with key leader engagements, partnerships, subject matter exchanges, but more importantly, where we leveraged bilateral agreements that we've got with many nations in the region, Vanuatu being a perfect example. And so we leveraged the bilateral ship rider agreement that we have with Vanuatu. 4 of their members came on board the ship Harriet Lane, and they proceeded to board Chinese fishing vessels in Vanuatu's exclusive economic zone. We provided the ship capacity. Vanuatu brought their expertise, their sovereignty, their authority to enforce their laws in their own EEZ. And it's that type of activity where the Coast Guard shines and where we've got incredible opportunity as a nation and as a service. So let me start. I'm going to introduce our panelists. First up, we've got Rear Admiral Rusty Dash. He's currently assigned in our Personnel Services Center and will be moving over to CG6 a little bit later this summer from people to technology, but welcome Rusty. Next up, we've got Rear Admiral Amy Grable. She's our Assistant Commandant for Engineering and Logistics, and so we'll ask her some hard questions on maintenance and where we are. Finally, next, Master Chief Charlie Sauls. He's currently serving as the Master Chief Petty Officer of Coast Guard Deputy, and he is moving down to support the Atlantic Area Commander as his gold badge later this summer. And then finally, we have Rear Admiral Jo Burdian. She's currently serving as our Chief of Response in the 5 Directorate and will be going to Joint Interagency Task Force West a little bit later. Somebody's got to live in Key West, and Jo volunteered. So welcome to our panelists, please. Good. All right, good morning and welcome, welcome all. We're hoping to have just, keep this fairly conversational as we talk through some of the challenges that we face as a service and how some of our innovative leaders are thinking differently, leading differently as we embrace the future. And I'm going to start with you, Rusty, for a first question. So, we're about 10% short in our enlisted workforce. It was a shortage of 3,500 at one point. We're down to 2,900, maybe even a little better than that. That was the last number I had. But can you talk about, some of the innovative things we've done for recruiting and from a talent strategy? And then I'm going to ask Admiral Burdian to talk about how are we directly managing operationally and some of the decisions we've made around that shortfall. So, Rusty.
Yes, ma'am, thanks. And so, as you said, with crisis comes opportunity, and the staff and PSC and FORSCOM have really leaned into that opportunity. We've done a bunch of stuff in recruiting to increase the capacity of Coast Guard Recruiting Command, how we reach out to young Americans. We're doing a bunch of new stuff with lateral entry. So one of our biggest shortfalls we're facing coming up is in machinery technicians. And so by reaching out to the trade schools of America, talking to folks going to become an automotive mechanic, we can very easily translate that at Training Center Yorktown into a short A school and make them a machinery technician in the Coast Guard and fill some of those critical gaps. But we're also looking at policies and processes that really would not be available to us without a workforce shortage. And some of those things are things like vested crew member, where we'll send somebody to a ship in their first unit rather than hanging out at A school and chipping paint or mowing the lawn for 6 months until they start class. They will go to their first unit into a petty officer billet and become that apprentice and start learning their trade, go off to A school, TDY, and then come back to that same unit. So it provides stability for the family, gets them a jump start on their career so they're not going to multiple units right out of boot camp. And that really is available to us because we have, unfortunately, empty petty officer billets to put non-rates into. So rather than wringing our hands about that, we've leaned into that and come up with some innovative policies and processes to take advantage of it. And really also forcing the conversation around prioritization, which is we do well as a Coast Guard in an operational situation. When we get to headquarters, sometimes we don't prioritize very well because everyone's super important. And so, ma'am, that crisis has really given us the opportunity to think differently.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Rusty. And right, it strikes me the system that we're operating, much like the other services, right, are the boot camp, A schools. They're optimized for 18-year-olds fresh out of high school with little to no life experience. Yet that's not the recruiting pool that we're experiencing or drawing into the service. And so innovating and acknowledging the life experience. You talked about machinist mates, cooks, corpsmen, all of that has been target rich for us. And it's really about allowing people to achieve their fullest potential and come and bring that experience to us. All right, Joe, you want to talk about some of the, we faced some hard choices as we came into the assignment cycle last fall, and it became apparent that we could not do what we normally do, which is put the shopping list out and then let the system fill it where people wanted to go. And so we had to make some tough decisions so that we were sending people to where we needed them to create frontline operational work. But over to you, Joe.
Yes, ma'am, and I appreciate Rusty talking about priorities. The truth is, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority, and that is something that we sometimes struggle with at headquarters. So, CG7 leading the effort to create a force alignment initiative to prioritize where and how Coast Guard operations would continue prioritizing those critical life-saving missions around the country gave us an opportunity to look at beyond where and who is conducting operations, how we're conducting operations. So Rusty talked about leveraging life experience to acknowledge that and better our Coast Guard. Within the world of maritime law enforcement, we looked at the incredible pool of reservists who are working in our Coast Guard, many of whom have experience in law enforcement in their civilian lives. And with the help of the Rating Force Master Chief for the MEs, we really came up with some innovative solutions, things like acknowledging that the experience in civilian law enforcement could be adaptive to Coast Guard law enforcement. And with 2 years as a boarding team member, and if you apply for it, hey, we'll waive that boarding officer school for you, lifting the capability and the capacity of the units that remain who are already shorthanded to field those boarding teams so that we can continue to conduct missions around the Coast Guard.
All right, thank you.
Ma'am,
Let's,
if I may add, you know, I think one of the greatest things that I've noticed, especially over the past couple of years, is our ability to challenge our processes internally. We have been doing that consistently, and you know, the processes that withstand that challenge are the ones that are worth keeping, and the ones that are not withstanding that challenge are worth revising. You know, talking to the workforce shortage and the impact on operations. You know, our senior enlisted have done a wonderful work building different you know, letters of intent, memorandums of agreement, trying to bring talent into the service to assist with recruiting, you know, and at the same time, you know, vested crew member helps units retain that talent, that trained person at the unit, so that they don't have to go through the break-in process and build from the ground up a talent within the unit to perform the operation. So all around, it is a win-win, and things that traditionally we would have never done. And because we're open and because we have the latitude and the authority to challenge these processes, I think we're in a much better place now and heading into even greater places. So.
And I'll pile on to that too, ma'am.
All right.
Because I'm glad that mission support was part of the conversation for the Force Alignment Initiative, because it allowed us to think about how we do maintenance differently and even more efficiently. For example, for the recurring depot availability program for our fast response cutters, we were able to save 48 billets and reassign those members elsewhere in the Coast Guard for 2 cutters in order to do a crewless RDAP, where we were able to do the maintenance in the yard without having the crews stand by for 90 to 120 days while we did that maintenance. And that was something that we wanted to do for a while, but it was a cultural shift because members are shifting which cutter that they're assigned to. But it was an opportunity for us.
Ma'am, I think it also starts with, you know, when you became Commandant and sent out your intent, you know, and the famous quote of tomorrow looks different, so will we, but you clearly told the leadership of the Coast Guard, the risk position is status quo. Yep. You know, there's that awesome quote from Grace Hopper, you know, the most dangerous words in the English language are, we've always done it that way. And so that gives people like me and the professionals at PSC the top cover to take risk in things where we are, you know, we were very set in our ways in our people processes because people are precious to us. And those processes built up over years, decades on what is fair, what is transparent. But in a crisis, we have to think differently. In a changing world, we have to think differently. And so credit to you and Master Chief Jones to challenging us to, Master Chief Saul's walk in our spaces saying, just because we did it that way last year, that isn't the starting point for how we have to operate in a crisis. And I just don't know that we would be in the same position if we didn't have leadership telling us to challenge our assumptions.
And I think the other opportunity is, like, a lot of the stuff we've done in the policy space to make sure that our policy is a springboard for operations and enabler for our crews have come from Coast Guard crews. Like, Joe Burdian is not sitting in the 5R shop I'm not sitting there with my pencil. Like, a lot of the solutions we've come up with have come from our workforce. Yeah. And it's been a great opportunity to just listen.
Yeah, one of the things that's been interesting to me as we've embarked on this journey is we have yet to hit an area where we need to go to Congress and ask for different authorities or law or regulatory change. And you know, I joke sometimes, right? We call them Commandant instructions, which means, hey, we've got a lot of room. They're ours, and we need to make them work for the workforce that we're attracting and the workforce that we want to retain. And so I do really appreciate all of the work that has gone on, because we have challenged a lot of assumptions, and you see it starting to pay dividends with the workforce. You know, you get the anecdotes that people are feeling heard, more connected, and you know, valued in ways that are critical to us as a service, and it's a testament to all these. I'm going to shift to Amy, and I want to ask you specifically about, you know, and I mentioned in my opening remarks, our aging infrastructure, the 50% shortfall in the depot maintenance account. And can you talk about some of the work going on in your world of work as the chief engineer, and how, one, in this vein of innovation, but then two, what are some of the immediate impacts around that shortfall, so that we can, continue to advocate for the need for reliable access to maintenance money in addition to the new assets?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So we do have shortfalls across all of our portfolios, including aviation, surface, and shore. You mentioned the shore infrastructure shortfall. We're deferring 50% of our maintenance on many of our major cutters. And what that means to our crews is what we used to call cannibalizing parts, from one cutter to put on another cutter. It's now so routine that we have a name for it. We call it a controlled parts exchange. We have a procedure for it. And every time we pull into port, after a long deployment, those electricians and mechanics, they have to remove systems and install them on another ship, and then do the same thing at the beginning of their next patrol, which cuts into their liberty time, their morale, and it's a risk to the systems, every time we have to do that. So that's just one example of, how it's impacting the crews, and it's also impacting our readiness and our resilience and our ability to maintain these cutters, like our national security cutters, for their 30-year service life.
Yeah, certainly, and I mentioned the Harriet Lane, and as we continue to push farther afield, maybe some thoughts on how, from a logistics standpoint, we're thinking about supporting the fleet as they move. The challenges we have now with controlled parts exchanges and the shortfall, but what do you see as you look into the future with regard to that forward deployment that we've got?
Yes, ma'am. Well, you mentioned Harriet Lane. That was a Herculean effort for the yard to get Harriet Lane ready to shift home ports from Virginia to Honolulu and get ready for her deployment. We were already doing the service life extension program as part of an acquisition, but we added 56 work items to the package to include habitability and additional HVAC and resilience items that weren't originally included. So we had people working around the clock to get that ship ready. So it's kind of a testament to what we can do. And it's also showed to the crew that, we valued them by improving the berthing spaces, the habitability. We renewed the galley. So there's things like that we can do to get our older cutters ready.
Yeah. Charlie, I'm going to go to you. From where you sit, all right, and we're talking now in kind of we've talked about the vein of readiness, right? But from where you're sitting, what do you see as some of the biggest threats to Coast Guard readiness?
I think, ma'am, the biggest threat to Coast Guard readiness is anything that contradicts our priorities, right? If we don't, anything that detracts from being able to transform our talent management, anything that detracts from us being able to, sharpen our competitive edge or enhance our mission excellence. I think the biggest threat is maintaining the status quo, because we're comfortable with the way it is and the way it works. People are our most valuable commodity right now, and having a trained and talented workforce is going to be the one thing that carries us into the next several decades. And so being able to transform how we do talent management so that the Coast Guard remains in a place, an environment, an occupation, a service where people gravitate to because they find value in what they do, because they know that what they do is important and makes a difference. That's really our biggest threat, is taking that away. So in losing, failing to attract the people that really are looking for a noble cause or something to further their future, to achieve their goals. And so, I think that's, in order to get there, we need to remain the best. We need to continue to do our best. We need the best training. We need the best assets. We need the best leaders, right? We need to continue to attract the best that America has to offer. And I think we're well on our way to doing that, and we have a long ways to go. But, I am very optimistic that what we're doing right now is exactly what we need to be doing to ensure that we attract those good people that we need to carry us into the future. And so I'm although my time is relatively short compared to several years ago, I wish I could stick around to see how awesome it's going to be, because a lot of the stuff that we're doing now are probably fruits of our labor that we won't be able to experience firsthand. So
yeah.
I love it, Master Chief. I really think that message of optimism, right, is going to attract and absolutely is going to retain the best workforce, right? Like the commitment to continuous improvement as people, as leaders, as an organization. I just think that's righteous, and I don't know anybody who's not attracted to that as a way of life, something to emulate and bring into their own space. Like, I just think it's wonderful.
Yeah, 100%. I think when we are the organization that offers people opportunity, when we are the organization where people feel they belong to, and when we're the organization where people find fulfillment in what they do every day, that is a win. That is, people want that in life, period. People go entire years, decades, a lifetime looking for those three things, right? Opportunity, fulfillment, and belonging. And so any work that we can do in that space to make sure that people feel like this is where they belong, because this is where there's plenty of opportunity and this is where they can find fulfillment, that is a triple win.
And it strikes me, right? Eliminating barriers is part of the work that we're endeavoring to work through. And maybe maybe start with Rusty. You've talked about many of the transformative things, but let's talk about some of the barriers that we're working to knock down. So, we are recruiting from the same talent pool that all of us are, both the military services and the industry that's represented in the room. And there are some very rigid requirements right now around military service, but eliminating barriers and then creating the culture that people want to join. And we'll start with Rusty, and we'll maybe just go down the line with perspectives.
Yes, ma'am. We are absolutely in competition, but we also have great partnership with the other Armed Services Recruiting Commands. Captain Ben Keffer, CEO of Coast Guard Recruiting Command, sits with admirals and generals that lead the DoD Armed Services Recruiting. And it is a bit of an arms race in innovation, and so we don't always do press releases when we change policy, but we were the first one that went to 42 years old to be able to join the Coast Guard.
42 years young.
42 years young,
Have
absolutely.
we had any kids?
We have had a parent-child with lateral entry. Child went through normal boot camp and recruit training, and parent came in lateral entry. So at CSA school, parent-child there, very cool to see. But there's also the acknowledgement that our standard of every single member of the Coast Guard needs to be worldwide deployable at every moment of their career. And the moment that you're not worldwide deployable, we start a shot clock and say, you've got to fix yourself and get to this point, or we're going to separate you. That's wonderful when we had lines out the door, a waiting list to join the Coast Guard. But in the competition for talent, we've got to accept that that's not a standard that is maintainable for us. So that has given us the opportunity to drive innovation. And so whenever we bump into one of those rules, this population generation that we're recruiting are very in touch with their mental well-being. They've been educated that way, and there's no stigma around mental wellness. And so they will talk to folks and seek treatment. And before, when we joined the Coast Guard, if you had a single thing in your medical record that said anything about mental health, that was an impossible hurdle to clear. And we just need to acknowledge that we're better as a society and a culture because we're more in touch with that. But that then can't be a barrier for us to enter the service. And I think that makes us a stronger culture when we're willing to check up on each other and say, a bad day is not just suck it up and move on. It's a cause for a conversation and care and compassion for each other. And so those things about culture and barriers to entry are inextricably linked, ma'am, and they're part of the life cycle discussion we have.
And to that point, I just went to KMA to recruit training, had an opportunity to have lunch with a 41-year-old guy who had married, has had a couple of kids, and I asked him, so what drove you to join the Coast Guard? And he said, well, it just called to me, right? Which speaks to what I was saying about opportunity, fulfillment, belonging, and then taking away the barriers. This is, if we hadn't changed that, we would not have those kinds of people joining the Coast Guard today. So what we're doing is working. It's not the end, but it is working, and it's working very, very well.
And I think there are retention tools as well. Like, I'm a person who got out of the Coast Guard for 2 years. I left active service as a lieutenant commander because I had 3 kids under the age of 2 at home, and had some leader who perhaps sat on a stage like this 10, 15 years ago not taken what probably felt like a risk to say, hey, you know what? We're going to allow for this temporary separation program. I wouldn't be here today because there is no way the Coast Guard would compete well against Jack Shawn and James Burdian. Some of you have met them. They're wonderful people, but they needed me. And then when they were ready for me to be able to come back, I still felt that calling, Master Chief. I still felt like I had work to do for our Coast Guard and the nation, and the ability to come back and still go to graduate school, still compete for special assignments, and gosh, to be sitting here today, like, is just a real testament to our service and to intrepid leaders years ago who were doing similar things to what you all are doing today.
Yeah, you got parental leave program, right? Which is like, it was like cutting edge, right? It was cutting edge, being able to bring folks in to take care of our own, so our own that needed to go take care of other things for in a temporary basis, we're able to do that, right? So you're a success story. Parental leave program is a success story, right? And anybody that's taken advantage of that program over the course of the past, was it 4 years now that we've had it in place, you know, is probably in the Coast Guard today because we made that possible for them. So, you know, to every single entity that had a hand in building that, you know, hats off to that, because that's the kind of stuff that we need.
You know, Master Chief, you talked about people that wouldn't be in the Coast Guard if we hadn't changed our standards. And the diversity of experience that people have before they join the Coast Guard is a tremendous asset to us and makes us stronger in a time where we're not just going to blindly follow the way we've always done things. If we really want to think differently, we have to have people with different experiences in the conversation leading Coast Guard units. And so the connective tissue between all of these ideas and concepts is really strong, and it's reinforcing for us and making us stronger and more able to deal with the challenges.
Yeah, so it strikes me, right, you touched on a number of key points here with the, and as I've had opportunity to engage with our young recruits at Cape May, that sense of purpose and calling that you find from the very beginning, you know, when you would think that they would just be exhausted and second guessing everything, they're like, no, I'm in, I understand why I've joined, I'm ready to sign up for 20 years. It's actually quite remarkable. In fact, recently I met a young non-rate. He was a day 2 at his first unit, and we were out at the Baltimore Bridge site, and at no point did I see him waver. He was like, I am in, I'm really excited to be here. Of course, I was joking that everybody gets to meet the Commandant on day 2 at their first unit, but I failed in bringing the President back a week later. That sense of community and belonging is alive and well, and is something that I know we all talk about and think about nurturing. And we've been talking about the whole host of changes and initiatives that we've got going on organizationally, and each of you, I know, has challenged your teams to rise to those challenges. Can you maybe reflect a little bit on, I'm going to use the term frozen middle, the mid-grade folks, 05s, 06s in some case, and I'm talking from a headquarters and policy specifically, who don't have a lot of incentive to make these changes. They see this change as much more risky than the status quo, because the status quo is comfortable. You know how to succeed in the status quo, yet the criticality is that we put some of those old processes behind. If you can maybe talk or reflect on how you've been challenging your teams to get uncomfortable with the reality and necessity of where we're going. And maybe Amy, you want to start?
Sure, ma'am. Yeah, I would say that the frozen middle is a real thing. We have a lot of these type of open discussions at our senior leader forums. And as you said, the new members coming in are open-minded and coming into the organization. But those in the middle, if they're not brought into the conversation and they don't feel like part of it, it's so much harder to get them to have buy-in. One of the examples is with the remote work policy. That's one area where, even though it's a policy, you know, sometimes I've seen members in the middle struggle to like offer it when it's the perfect opportunity. We've been able to retain, because of some of these new policies, people that otherwise, like they're top engineers, very skilled, and just for whatever temporary situation, they've been able to leverage these policies so that we've been able to retain their talents, when otherwise we would have taken a vacancy. So I think that's one area where I've been trying to challenge my staff.
Yes, ma'am. So I think that you hit the nail on the head. The people who have understand the model and competed to a point, and they see their next 5 and 10 years and their future, they don't want us to change the rules of the game or the system, because and they've had some frank conversations with me of, hey, you're an admiral, you already succeeded, so it's super easy for you to say, oh yeah, change all the rules, because you're not going to have to compete and advance through them. And what we challenge them to say is, as you think about it, there's opportunity. And so what was frustrating to you when you were a junior officer? And yes, congratulations, you're succeeding, but those things that you thought were barriers or frustrations, you now have the opportunity that not everybody volunteers to come to Coast Guard headquarters. It's not number one on everyone's dream sheet, but the opportunity is you get to help change policy and process that influences the entire Coast Guard at a time when the leadership is telling us it is okay, it is imperative that we rethink our rules. And so that it is, even this week, I encountered Frozen Middle, and we attack it where we can. And honestly, some of those folks get minimized, and they're not a voice in the conversation. And so that's the other part of my challenge to folks is, listen, we're going. And so you can either be part of this, or you can be marginalized and minimized. And so do you want to be on the bus or not on the bus?
Yeah, the analogy that was recently shared with me was, so we had a fireside chat with Brene Brown at the Coast Guard Academy just a couple weeks ago. And she says, yeah, it's like rolling a snowball downhill. She says, and you're going to spit some people out of the back. And, so it was an interesting mental model. It's a different, right, the frozen middle is who sometimes ends up out the back. But being on board and engaged in the conversation is critical. You may not be comfortable with the conversation, but you got to be part of it, right? Mm-hmm. Showing up and being part of it. Yeah. Joe, and
yes,
then
ma'am.
Charlie.
And I think it's a leadership challenge for us to challenge that frozen middle, or whatever the term of art you want to use, to provide feedback and not criticism. Right? Feedback is just a critically important part of any growth process, for a person, for a process, for an organization. And we need those folks with years and years of experience to provide their insights, but from a place of productivity, and then discerning that from just the straight up criticism, right? Like Margaret Thatcher would talk about her critics and say they would see her walking on water and say it was because she couldn't swim, right? Like there's a difference between feedback that's designed for growth and progress and improvement versus folks who are just sitting back throwing stones. I think those are the folks who get spit out of the snowball, because it's okay. This is a relationship between our Coast Guard and our Coast Guard personnel, and so it has to work for everyone involved. But I think there's some challenge for all of us to address those folks who may be a little uncomfortable and lift their best ideas out.
Yes, ma'am. I think at the end of the day, the shepherds of the process, right? The caretakers of the process are obviously and understandably very protective of their process, right? Because they're very good at what they do, and repetition builds proficiency, right? And proficiency is good when you need to act very, very quickly and instinctively. But sometimes those processes are outdated so much to the point where even if we get really, really good at them, they're not most effective. And so which then takes us to change and innovation, right? And so there's this tug of war between being innovative and being proficiency, and then achieving that right balance between the two, where you can introduce change into a process, but do so at a pace where you still maintain an acceptable degree of proficiency, and being able to communicate that between those that want to make those changes and the process holders, if you will. That is key. But to that effect, if you stand your ground a little too hard, this machine is moving, right? And I think McPog says it, this train's moving 100 miles an hour, right? You get on, so that you can be part of the team. If not, you're going to get left behind. And that's exactly where we need to be going. We've done this, and MCPOG has done a fantastic job with the CISO program, right, in how that gets administered. We've taken steps to update our Chiefs Call to Initiation, or CCTI processes, to a point where it's far more agile today than it ever was, and it can be adaptive, right, in future iterations constantly, right? So that's just a couple of examples where we're trying to maintain that certain degree of agility and adapt to change so that we can introduce new ideas, test them out. If they work, great, we'll keep them. If they don't work, that's fine. Okay, so what? We failed, big deal. Move on, take it out of the list, and let's just keep moving forward. But failing on one small step is not reason just to stop altogether. We have to keep evolving.
Yeah. Ma'am, one of the other things that I've observed that is a behavior of the frozen middle is we have made it so hard to update those Commandant instructions that people look at a change and they literally go, oh my God, that's going to be 18 months of work to do a thing. And so I was really excited to see Admiral Raymond and Mr. Campo partnered on a better way, faster way to update Commandant instructions. And I think if we make it less painful to do the bureaucratic work to update policies, some of that frozen middle will start to thaw, because they just look at pain in TMS taskers and concurrent clearance and all of the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into working at headquarters. And if we make it easier to Coast Guard at headquarters, I think we're also kind of starting to thaw the frozen middle that way too.
Yeah, it's funny, Rusty. I like to tell my crew in 5R, because we are moving. We are moving on maritime law enforcement policy. We are providing new tools to the field, and every once in a while I get notes bad about things like concurrent clearance. And my question is always, am I allowed to sign this? And then I say something like, we're not NATO. I think we can acknowledge disagreement and move forward, and then correct anything that needs to be corrected. So I think you're spot on.
Yeah, no, I think just really appreciate the perspectives on how to unthaw the middle. You want to aspire to rise to your sort of values and ideals. The reality is you fall to your process. And so if your process is dated, stodgy, inflexible, you all have great people working for you, but they are bound by this inefficient, inflexible system. So Charlie, I want to go to you. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the establishment of our core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty. And Admiral Loy, Jim Loy, many of you know him, was Commandant when we established those. I saw him recently and thanked him for the foresight to have brought those core values forward for us as an organization. And they've been so foundational, in fact, to the point where I've got 40 plus years in uniform, I didn't actually even reflect or realize those core values didn't exist when I joined the service. And they've stood the test of time. And I know we've had a lot of discussion on culture and culture work, but let's start with the core values, Charlie, and some of the work that you've been engaged with, and some of our senior enlisted as well as the rest of the organization.
Yes, ma'am. And first off, thank you for giving us the opportunity to challenge some of these things and to give us the opportunity to run with projects like these. So, as a result of a couple of different studies, one of the things that we learned was that we needed to better codify, expand the definition of our core values so that are well understood throughout the service. We've had a couple of other studies that also reflect how different people understand. They have their own definitions of the core values, which are, they're on one side or the other, but some of them don't come together. So our job is to unify those definitions, and we're doing that very differently than I think we've ever done many things in the past, which is we have some outside experts. We brought some outside experts in to be part of the team. We built an actual senior guidance team, but the core of the work is actually going to be done by the workforce. We've been able to identify, I think we just had a panel, we selected about 170 people Coast Guard wide. These are top performers, right, that are going to be able to really help us codify what our lived core values look like today. because our core values really don't exist unless we bring them alive through personal action. And we have to. We have to act the core values out, right, routinely, and eventually, after acting the core values out the way we want people to, then we become the core values. We become honor. We become respectful. We become devoted to duty, right? So long as we do this consistently, right? And so the goal is to get that perspective from the workforce. We want to know from the E3, the E2, all the way up to the O10, what does honor look like to you? Give me an example of what you've observed, honor, respect, devotion, duty look like to you recently. Because guess what? Our core values very much exist today. By and large, we have people that actionize these core values every day. And so we want to be able to capture that from our best, right, so that we can codify what the services definition of core value is, right, and then incorporate those definitions into every aspect of the life cycle of every member in the service, right, from the time you come into the Coast Guard, right, people understanding what honor, respect, devotion, duty are per the Coast Guard definition, and then inculcating that at every institutional point throughout a person's development in an organization, whether you decide to stay in for 4 years or you decide to stay for 30 years. So, this is something that members will encounter, at boot camp, at A school, maybe at a B school or C school. This is something that members will encounter when they go to their leadership development centers, right? This is something that can be incorporated into every command philosophy or, in people's personal leadership philosophy. These are things that are going to be part of the, professional military education, part of the, enlisted personnel qualifications throughout their time in the service. So the idea is this is at the very core of who we are. We want this to be foundational throughout a member's career. So I am super excited that this is not just something that we're building out of headquarters and we're going to say, hey, workforce, we want you to adopt this, right? This is something that we have the entire organization, the very best in our organization, actually going out and surveying focus groups, peer-to-peer conversations, which usually are really productive, super productive, especially when you have them at the E4, E5 level, right? And then you get that information, bring it up, we put it together, right? And then we farm it back out and say, hey, have some focus group, discuss this amongst your different communities, talk within your chiefsmiths, talk within the aviation community, talk within your civilian workforce, right? And then, have that data coalesce into something that everybody owns. We all own it because we all had a little piece of it, a little bit of our own personal blood, sweat, and tears went into building this product, which we are confident is going to be foundational over the next several decades.
Yeah, no, thanks. Right, culture does not spring forward in a void or a vacuum. Right? We collectively, those of us in the service, create in our little habits and big habits, and of course, core values become essential and foundationally. And so, we have embarked on a sort of journey without end, is how I characterize it, around strengthening our service culture, and the core value work is part of that. But also accountability, transparency, and how we create an environment and a culture that is intolerant of harmful behaviors. And my definition of where we need to be as an organization is that everyone always has a workplace experience that's free from harm, from assault, harassment, hazing, bullying, retaliation, retribution, that is where they're safe, heard, valued, where they feel that they belong. That's what we aspire to. And the reality force is that not everyone is having that experience in the service. And so we are embarked on a number of different efforts. If I could write a commandant instruction, these instructions that says thou shalt, and have it, have all of it addressed, that would have been done. But this is a multifaceted effort. And As the leader of the organization, one of the key things that you can do as a leader, that you have to do as a leader, is give permission to have difficult conversations. If you don't bring the difficult conversation into the room and empower your team to talk about it, then it's not even that it's not talked about, it becomes almost forbidden to be talked about. And so I'm going to start with Joe, and we'll kind of come back down. This is truly a journey without end. We are all on it. And I also, the sense of urgency here is it too becomes existential. If we can't recruit, retain, operate the world's best Coast Guard without holding ourselves accountable and creating the environment that empowers and enables everyone to serve to the best of their abilities. But you've each had different roles in this and different experiences, and if you could just reflect or offer some perspectives. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. First, I really want to say thank you. This is my 4th time in the service being involved in a Tiger team or a work group revolving around culture, elimination of sexual harassment, sexual assault. And the previous 3 iterations really felt like we were fixing something. And ma'am, this feels different. I'm here to tell everyone here, this feels different. This feels like change, an endeavor on the timeline of forever, which is weird, and maybe you could tattoo somewhere, but right, like it feels like change. All of us who've been in the service, or I imagine any service, have heard something along the lines of, hey, you learned as much from bad leaders as you do from good. But that's nonsense. Like, I think part of our goal is to eliminate those bad leaders from our workforce, because what you learn from bad leaders is that you don't belong, that you have to hide. You have to hide yourself, you have to hide your performance, you have to hide your goals to survive and not to succeed. And while I understand some folks in the room may be experiencing some dissonance, right? Some like difference between their lived experience with the Coast Guard, either in uniform, as a partner, as an ally, as a contractor, as someone who routinely works with us, and the stuff that you've seen in the news, just like in so many other parts of our lives, 2 things can be true at once. Our Coast Guard is an incredible organization with values and missions that are laudable by any measure, but some folks, including me, have been subjected to harmful behaviors. And I think what we want to do, what I'm so proud to be an advisor to Admiral Gautier, who's leading the campaign on your behalf, ma'am, to be able to do is to resolve that dissonance, to create an environment in which everyone feels as though they can succeed and not just survive, in which everyone belongs and can achieve their full potential. And I really am grateful to be part of it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. What I will offer is that you have, when you know what right looks like, it's very easy to fall behind and follow what right looks like. It is very disruptive to follow and then find out that that's not what you want to do, because then that means you have to search for a different example elsewhere. And if you get enough bad examples, that becomes very disruptive and dissatisfying. So, following that one person, what right looks like, having those good examples to follow, creates that feeling of belonging, creates additional opportunity, makes people want to strive to become better versions of themselves. That's what we want. We want everybody to be able to say, if you're here today, say to someone else, hey, I am glad you're here. You belong here. You add value. Have you considered doing this, right? Which I think you would be successful at. Right? Those little conversations, if everybody had a little conversation like that every day or at least once a week with some other person, right, you would generate a culture where we're always encouraging each other to become just a little bit better versions of ourselves. And that is inherently military, that's inherently American, right, to leave things better than we found them, right? And so that's really what we're trying to do, is just nurture what's already there, right, and then have it flourished.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So I would say the message for what we're trying to aspire to is aspirational, and it resonates with people, but people want to know, what can I do? Like, that seems too hard for me as one person to make a change. One thing that everybody can do that I've kind of learned through this process is to focus on those lower level harmful behaviors that we were talking about. We were calling them boundary conditions, things like an inappropriate joke or a gesture or making somebody feel excluded. When somebody else notices that and addresses it and calls it out on the spot, and that becomes part of the normal culture, and people see other people modeling that, that's where I think we start to see some real change, and people will feel part of the change. And that's something that I've been talking about to people with, and they feel like they can, they can do that.
Yeah. You know, ma'am, the cutterman in me, ship driver in me, wants us to have taken early and substantial action to avoid collision. But, you know, we find ourselves in a place where we're in extremis sometimes. And it's interesting to watch from where I sit right now and PSC, us holding people accountable or not, even now having hard conversations of, I have this rock star, could be a master chief, could be a commander or captain, that is absolutely stellar, but we have concerns about that person. And when we keep them in the organization and keep giving them the next great job that advances their career, the people that work for them look at us and it absolutely undermines all of the work and the message we're doing, because somebody knew, more than one somebody's knew and continued to advance that person's career. And really the foundational thing from the personnel management system is figuring out how we identify the people early in their career who have a misaligned view of what leadership looks like, and giving them the opportunity to correct, or we kick them out of the back of the snowball and say, hey, thanks, you can go be you, but it's not going to be in our Coast Guard. Right. And that is really hard for us to do for somebody who is succeeding professionally, but failing personally and failing as a leader for the Coast Guard. And I'm just saying that is work we are still, in the accountability part, ma'am, struggling to do consistently, both on the enlisted and the officer side. And every time we don't hold ourselves accountable and make a hard choice, it's undermining the work that we're trying to do.
Right, and this is the dissonance that sort of opposite side of the coin that Joe was talking about. And you know, what strikes me, and so, you know, mindful we're coming into our closer here, particularly with regard to non-criminal misconduct. We have room to grow and mature policies and create accountability and transparency, but what is foundational to all of that is trust. And so I'm going to go do a speed round here as we kind of come into the closure. Thoughts from each of you as to how you engender trust, rebuild trust, right? Trust exists at multiple levels in the organization. You know, its foundation, it exists from, you know, member to member in small work groups, but it trickles up through the organization into leadership roles in the organization. And we have elements where that trust has been shattered, and particularly as it pertains to accountability and adherence to our core values. But maybe just a quick reflection from each of you on how you're working to build and retain trust within your teams.
Yes, ma'am. I think I try and start from a place of truth and vulnerability. I have made a mistake. Maybe we have made a mistake. And talking about those things, one, is a way to reflect on how that's okay. You can fail and survive, fail and succeed, and hug your own scars a little bit, but also to create space for other folks to do the same. I think it's key to trust.
Man, from my perspective, I think trust is an exercise in constant comms and being able to say what you mean what you say, and then walk the walk afterwards. At the same time, it also means not committing to something you can't deliver on, right? And if you fail, being able to go back and say, you know what, we couldn't get it this time, I'm not done trying. Or being able to communicate and say, hey, you know what, this is probably not the hill that we need to go through, but there are other things that we can be working on, and encouraging a different perspective, a different way of doing things. You know, being able to communicate, being able to acknowledge when things don't go our way, and owning those, especially as senior leaders, saying, you know what, I didn't get this right, I messed this up, whatever, being able to talk about it. Not only talk about the failure, but talk about how we overcome that failure is huge to building trust, because we're just acknowledging we're human, right? We're all human.
Yes, ma'am. So I think trust is something that takes a long time to establish, but it only takes one bad move to lose it. So it takes constant care and feeding, and I think you build trust one conversation at a time.
Yes, ma'am. I think I echo what my colleague said and shipmate said. I think it's also being able to explain some of our thought process when we make decisions. If somebody doesn't agree and say, challenging, being open to the challenge of explaining our logic and why we made the decisions we did, or why it looks like we failed, and we can explain the things, and either why we think we didn't fail, or acknowledging that we failed and what we need to do better, what we have learned from it, so that we don't make that same mistake again in the future. So because we're human, our wonderful Coast Guard is made up of people that are flawed and are going to make mistakes, but how do we get better every day, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, so thank you. I want to thank each of the panelists for being here with us this morning. I want to thank all of you for being here bright and early on a Wednesday morning. I am incredibly optimistic about where we are going as a Coast Guard. We have challenge ahead, but I see nothing but opportunity. And it really, what leaves me so optimistic is the workforce, the quality and talent of leadership that we've got in the organization, the quality and talent of every one of those young people that is coming to us, whether it's a non-rate graduating from Cape May on a Friday, or the incredible talent that we've got at the Coast Guard Academy, working to be commissioned as officers. The younger generation, they are engaged. They want this conversation. They want to make it better. They have a sense of purpose, and it leaves me, again, really optimistic for the service. Really a privilege to be here with all of you this morning, and thank you for joining us. Thank you to Sea Airspace and the Navy League for allowing us to host this breakfast. So thank you. Thanks, everybody.